Hi, I'm Viola Kanno, and today we're going to present about the monetary and fiscal policy.
There are two main macroeconomic policy tools the government uses to try to keep the economy growing at a reasonable rate with low inflation. The first one is monetary policy and the second one is fiscal policy.
Monetary policy is the actions a central bank takes to influence a country's money supply and the overall economy.
In the United States, the Federal Reserve is responsible for monetary policy. It tries to make sure the money supply grows neither too quickly nor too slowly. It conducted mainly through open market operation by buying or selling government bonds. In an open market operation, the Federal Market Reserves buy bonds in exchange for money, and the stock of money goes up. Or the Fed sells bonds in exchange for money paid by purchasers of the bonds, and then money stock will fall.
Consider monetary expansion. Increase in money supply creates an excess supply of money, which caused the LM curve shifts to the right, and the public adjusts by buying other assets, and the assets price increase and yields decrease, which moves to the point E1. After the money market clears with lower interest rate, decline in interest rate results in excess demand for goods. Goods market out of equilibrium at E1. Output expands along the LM right here. The final position is at E in the bottom right side right here. The note of the slope of the LM curve. The relatively flat LM curve, the shifts in LM curve result in small change in interest rate and small change in the output. And the relatively steep LM curve, there will be large effects in the interest rate and in the output. The monetary transmission mechanism is the process by which asset prices and general economic conditions are affected as a result of monetary policy decisions. The steps in transmission mechanism is the first one is that an increase in real balances generates a portfolio disequilibrium. That is, at the prevailing interest rate and level of income, people are holding more money than they want. The portfolio holders attempt to reduce their money holdings by buying other assets, and this asset price and yields will change. The change in money supply changes the interest rates, which drives down. The change in interest rates affect the aggregate demand. There are three stages in the mechanism. First is a change occurs in money supply or money demand curve, which changes the interest equilibrium rate. Second is the change in the equilibrium rate results in a change in desired investment. The change in the aggregate expenditure causes a shift in the AD curve. For example, suppose the Bank of Indonesia increased the money supply in economy X. Following this rightward shift, the first effect would be on the interest rate. As you can see, there is a decrease in the equilibrium interest rate from 1 to 2. If we then compare the effects of the increase in money supply on desired expenditure, we can see that the decrease in the interest rate has increased desired investment expenditure. The increase in desired investment then causes an increase in aggregate expenditure function. Then, The increase in aggregate expenditure function results in a rightward shift of aggregate demand curve, thus increasing real GDP. The liquidity trap is a situation in which the public is prepared at a given interest rate to hold whatever amount of money is supplied, or is an inconsistent economic situation in which the interest rates are very low and saving rates are very high, rendering money policy ineffective. This implies that the LM curve is horizontal. These changes in the quantity of money do not shift. Monetary policy has no impact on either the interest rates or the level of income. So this basically means that the monetary policy is powerless in the liquidity trap. Possibility of a liquidity trap at low interest rates is a notion that grew out of the theories of the great English economist John Maynard Keynes. This is the example of the graph. A monetary expansion, which the shift from the LM to the right, has no effect on equilibrium interest rates or output. However, in fiscal expansion, the shift from the IS to the right side leads to the higher level of output from Y to the right, with no change in interest rates. Since interest rates are unchanged, there is no crowding out effect either.
There are some ways to help the economy come out of the liquidity trap. The first is the Federal Reserve can raise interest rates. This may lead people to invest more of their money rather than hoard it. This may not work, but it is one possible solution. The second one is a big drop in price. When this happens, people just can't help themselves from spending money. The lure of lower prices become too attractive, and savings are used to take advantage of those low prices. The third one is increasing government spending. When they increase the spending, it implies that the government is committed and confident in the national economy. The classical case. This is the polar opposite of the horizontal LM curve. The monetary policy cannot affect the level of income. The LM curve is vertical when the demand for money is entirely unresponsive to the interest rate. The equation is this. If the H is 0, there is a unique level of income, which implies that the LM curve is vertical at the level of income. The vertical LM curve is called the classical case. We rewrite the previous equation, but with the H equals 0, the equation will become like this. This implies that the nominal GDP, which is P times Y, depends on the quantity of the money. This is called the quantity theory of money. When the LM curve is vertical, change in the quantity of money has a maximal effect on the level of income. Shifts in the IS curve do not affect the level of income. Next is the zero lower bound and unorthodox monetary policy. Zero bound is an expansionary monetary policy tool where a central bank lowers short-term interest rate to 0 if needed to stimulate the economy. The Fed cannot push nominal interest rates below 0 because investors can earn a 0 rate of return simply by holding cash. This lower limit on interest rates is called the zero lower bound, or the ZLB. The zero lower bound puts a limit on how far monetary policy can go. The bound isn't usually relevant because interest rates are usually well above 0. The zero lower bound becomes important two circumstances occur at the same time. Nominal interest rates are already low and there is a need to use explanatory monetary policy. Interest rates are likely to be low when inflation is low. This is one reason that a central bank do not try to get inflation all the way down to zero. And this is the example of the graph of unorthodox monetary policy.
Hello guys, now I will explain about fiscal policy and crowding out. Fiscal policy shifts the IS curve, and the IS curve slopes downwards because the decrease in the interest and rate increase investing spending. Changing in fiscal policy shifts the IS curve. The equation is like in the PowerPoint. There is two equation, and the first is the main equation, and the second is to find the alpha g for the government. Now, in the second slide, I will explain about the increase in government spending. Interest rate equilibrium income must be raised by alpha g times the increase in the government spending because is a excess demand for real balanced interest rate rises. Firms plan investment spending decline at a higher risk rate, thus aggregate demand falls off. Now I will explain about crowding out. Comparing the new initial equilibrium, increase in government spending raises both income and interest rate. But another comparison is between new and the double action equilibrium in the good market and unchanged interest rates. Crowding out occurs when expansionary fiscal policy causes interest rates rise, thereby reducing private spending, particularly investment. Now explain about crowding out with two extreme cases. The first one is the liquidity trap. If liquidity trap is about economy in the liquidity trap, the LM curve is horizontal, and an increase in government spending has its fully multiplier effect on the equilibrium level of income. And there is no change in interest rate associated with the change in government spending, and thus no investment spending cut off. Therefore, there is no dampening on the effect of the increasing government spending on income. The second extreme case is the classical crowding out. If the LM curve is vertical, an increase in government spending has no effect on equilibrium level of income and increase of the interest rate. If the demand for the money is not related to the interest rate as vertical LM curve, implies there is no unique level of income which the money and market is at equilibrium. But if government spending is higher and the output is unchanged, must be offsetting reduction in private spending. Now we'll explain about the composition of output and the policy mix. Monetary policies operate by stimulating interest rate responsive component of the aggregate demand, primarily investing spending. Earliest effect of the monetary policy is on residential construction. Fiscal policies operate in manner that depends on precisely what the goods government buys or what the taxes and transfer it changes. And the last one is about the policy mix. Many conservative favor stabilization policies that cut taxes in recession and cut government spending a boom or a bomb. Over time, given enough cycle, the government sectors become very small as a conservative would want it to be. The counterpart of this view is those who believe that there is a broad scope of government spending on education and the environment, job training, and rehabilitation. So, policymaker can choose policy mix, a combination between monetary and fiscal policies that will not only economy to fall unemployment but also make contribution to solving other policy problems. Thank you, and it's all of my presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is Ongkojoyo and today I'm going to talk about fiscal policy mix in action. So this part of our presentation mainly talks about how the fiscal policy have played out in real life. So we're probably going to talk about future economic history, especially in America. But before we getting into discussion, I think it's important to note that the history after World War II, the United States had two severe recessions, both had miserably high unemployment, but the causes were very different as there were some elements in government response. But secondly, this section does not only serve to discuss the issue of the policy mix in action in the real world. This section also reintroduces us about the problem of inflation in certain countries, especially in the USA. So the first thing I'm going to talk about here is that the 1980s Great Recession. So in 1980s, the economic policy was departed radically from the politics from the previous 2 decades. First, they used tight money as implemented in 1989. Pretty much tight money is usually resulted to the high monetary policy that restricts the money supply, to reduce the amount of money banks have to lend, to slow down the economy activity due to the inflation being rising too fast. But how does the price of a good can affect the prices of others? So there are two different reasons why, especially in the USA, we're talking about the rising price of oil. So it goes two ways because of the diversity of the industry. First, high oil prices can drive jobs creations and investment as it becomes economically viable for oil companies to exploit high cost share oil deposits. But secondly, higher oil prices also hit businesses and consumers with higher transportation and manufacturing costs. But how did the government respond in this part? What the government responds is that they use fiscal policy that uh, hires the government spending to stimulate the economy in order to create a more robust recovery that followed in the remains of resources and considerable amount of dispute, with some giving credit for the stimulative effect in the Reagan era tax cuts. So after this recession, the US economy entered its longest peacetime expansion. After that, there's already another recession in 1990 and 1991. So the problem was that it was caused by the Reagan economics that was cutting taxes for those people who are wealthy. The policy resulted into both economic discount and also insufficient funding and expenditures due to those wealthy people cannot actually fund the expenditures that the government was going to get. So what was the cause of this, right? The cause was that the policy that exists. So how did the government respond? The government responds that it sought to counter these concerns by embracing a restrictive monetary policy through which they hoped to curb inflation and stabilize prices. The result was that it was very dramatic, although the National Bureau of Economic Research has concluded that in the early 1990 recession lasted for just 8 months. Conditions improved after they implemented this monetary policy, and it improved slowly after, with unemployment reaching almost 8% as late in June in 1992. So it concluded very, very nicely after that. So the recession in 2001, the subsequent recovery. So details on the how recession started and worsened was ultimately led to its end. It was because of dot-com bubble and also the 9/11 attacks and a series of accounting scandals in the media of US corporations. So the 2001 was an 8-month recovery downturn that began in March and lasted through November. So this is a short term. But is this a contractionary or expansionary? The Federal Reserve uses the expansionary monetary policy that also contributed at the end of the recession. The Federal Reserve began lowering rates in January 2001 and continued to lower them at approximately 1.5 points each month. How did it conclude? It concluded where the economy recovered in fourth quarter of the year, the impact lingered, and the national unemployment continued to climb, reaching 6% in June 2003. So fiscal policy in the face of crisis. The question is that should we only use fiscal policy or should we also use monetary policy? So the difference is that monetary policy and fiscal policy refer to the two of the most highly recognized tools used to influence the nation's economic activity. So monetary policy is that it primarily concerns with the management of interest rate and the total supply of money. Fiscal policy is a collective term by taxing and spending action from the government. So in comparing the two, fiscal policy generally has a higher impact on consumers than monetary policy in the first place, as it can lead to the increase of employment and income, whereas monetary policy is that it is used to reach and maintain a low and stable inflation rate to reach a long-term GDP growth trend. So The problem is that these two are pretty much the different thing and is used in different situation. But second question is that why did the Obama administration put an enormous stimulus package? And this is also one of the fiscal policy that exists. So Obama's stimulus package, or called the ARRA, was cutting taxes by $288 billion. It spent $224 billion in standing unemployment benefits, education, and healthcare. So the ARRA report in 2015 is that 68 billion went to tax relief and credits. Others were spent to health service, education, unemployment compensation, and also veteran tax. The, the report after this is that Obama's stimulus package was a high success created by Obama. So after all the recession, in all of the countries affected by the Great Recession, the recovery was very slow and very uneven, and the broader social consequence of the downturn, including the United States and lower fertility, was this one of the worst economic calamity? I would say yes, because there's a historically high level of student debt and diminished jobs prospects among young adults in the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009, which lasted for 18 months, which is 1.5 years. So this figure shows about what happened in the initial recession date, about how the economy got much worse. As you can see in 2008, inflation was gradually falling and remained low. So the last thing I want to talk about is the German policy in 1990 and 1992. So what happened to this policy? So what happened is that when East Germany and West Germany was reunited in 1990, the West Germany government accepted an obligation to attempt the living standards of Eastern Germany. But the problem is that the Eastern Germany doesn't really have a great infrastructure to begin with. So what they did is that they use fiscal policy. This fiscal policy, or expansionary you can say, is when the government spending is very much higher than the revenue. So they do not care about how much revenue they're going to get, they're only focusing on spending more government spending. What did they had to use loose fiscal policy? They had to use this because it requires an immediate increase in the government spending for East German infrastructure and to transfer payments for the residents of the former East Germany. I think the conclusion is that these fiscal policy and monetary policy worked pretty well, but the difference is that it was used in different kinds of situation, and it's very important to note that fiscal policy can stimulate the economy and create an economic benefit to our country, especially in economic crisis back in the day. I think that's all we can say. Thank you for watching this video.